I mean, but the thing that's gut-wrenching is that these families get sold. And all she has to do is to describe, see, in order to justify that, say, well, these people are different. They don't actually become attached to their children, so it's not a problem, right? All she has to do is describe what it's like to have your child sold from you. And you read that and you say, no, you couldn't, there's no way you could justify that to anyone. So it's not just a personal point of view. But it's always historically contingent wherever we are. And we emphasize that by saying, no matter what we've achieved, we always know we have more blind spots. Now, your question.
I'd like to have your opinion on teaching. I work at, or I volunteer at this science camp that teaches kids environmental responsibility. We essentially give them a gift that says, these are the things that are going on, this is how you can tell how the water quality is. These are like the scientific tools you can have to tell whether or not your environment is working. And essentially put a bow tie around that to say, you are responsible because you have these tools, and now you can be more responsible.
Yeah.
We're instilling morals into them. But how does that play into your progression? You bring up Uncle Tom's Cabin as if they were teaching.
Well, you know, it happens really naturally with children. I still remember. I mean, you know, I still remember the day my daughter Rebecca came home from first grade, and she said to me, I wish human beings had never existed. Wow. It's about to knock me over. I said, you know, I was a little radical. I was thinking, really? Never existed? Why? Well, in class that day, they had learned about the whales and about the whales being hunted to extinction. And then they started talking about other animals being hunted to extinction. And so she had drawn a conclusion, I have a solution to this problem. Okay? Now, I encouraged her to consider other solutions. But what was interesting about it was the personal responsibility kicked right in. Right? When you do it, in other words, and again, it's sort of like, even if it's just water quality, if you tell people about, say, the depletion of the salmon stock or something like that, people get engaged. Right? And so you have an easy job. But notice it's a job where it works bottom up. What you do is people find out about particular kinds of problems that engage them. That's the way it works. It doesn't start by, oh, here are the principles for environmental ethics or something. I hope I'm not taking away from your course, but that's actually, you know, you get to principles, but the engagement comes from bottom up, from particular problems. And as I say, you know, I mean, I tell the story about my daughter because people actually think that like children are just self-interested or something like that. But if you've had children, at a very young age, they learn not only to identify with other humans, they're identifying with the whales. Right? And if you then read Piaget, yeah, that's right. Young children live in a world in which everything is alive, and they identify with everything. It's an amazing world they live in. But it's great for people who want to teach responsibility. Yes?
I'm in a Wittgenstein seminar.
Oh, yeah.
The early Wittgenstein's moral position comes as a direct result from his theory of knowledge and language. So if you take moral progress, real moral progress, as a possibility, what sort of theory of knowledge and language underpins that?
Good. First of all, how many people are familiar with Wittgenstein's philosophy? Okay. Now, can I have a minute? I'm going to cry. Okay. Remember on the list of one of them I put up, the positivists? Wittgenstein, the early Wittgenstein actually was the leading statement of the positivist view in philosophy. Only purely descriptive statements were true. That meant that almost all of philosophy was not either true or false. I mean, that's sad. That makes me cry. The later Wittgenstein throws over the earlier Wittgenstein. They say, oh, great. But the one thing that he doesn't change is it's still all truth is purely descriptive truth. This is what philosophy does to people. So then we say, what's the alternative? The alternative is that when you look out on the world and you say, are there reasons for thinking slavery is wrong? That it's true that slavery is wrong? it takes a whole lot of philosophy to get people to say no to that question. So what you do is you say, why did they do it? They actually end up in these views because they can't make sense of the alternative. So all I'm doing is I'm trying to say, first of all, let's carve off an area for the alternative. And after we've looked at all the others, let's save space for the alternative, and then let's try to make sense of it. And so one of the ways is then what we can say, we can understand it is, there's a certain kind of objective moral point of view, and I tried to articulate it in terms of empathy and impartiality, and so use the model of the original position. But what's crucial is, in the same way that somebody could say, there's an objective point of view on purely descriptive things. Like say, for example, if you're familiar with Tom Nagel talks about the objective point of view. He says you go to the objective point of view and you say, science, it sort of gives us what the world is like from the objective point of view. Then Nagel goes on and says, but why would you think it was just limited to science? When you step back and say, okay, I'm not talking about the way the world is as it appears to me, I'm talking about the way it really is. It seems just as compelling that there are things, the example Nagel gives is, think about a burn victim, this intense suffering from the burn. If there's a way of alleviating that suffering, he claims, from an objective point of view, you'd say, you ought to alleviate it. You see, that's not a purely descriptive claim, that's a normative claim. You ought to alleviate it. Or there's a reason to alleviate it. And so it's a way of generalizing the idea of objectivity from the purely descriptive to this other realm. But it is puzzling because people think, well, at least I understand in the scientific realm. I mean, I didn't even put on the list pragmatism. The pragmatists actually give up truth everywhere, but positivism is enough. Positivism is enough to raise the problem. And so then it's a real interesting challenge, which is one that, if you say, how can we make sense of this? I want to take it step by step. I want to say, well, first of all, we find the good examples where we think that really is moral progress. And then we think and say, okay, what would explain, one, how it could be really objective moral progress, and two, interestingly, this is the epistemological side of what I do, how human beings would be able to fallibly recognize it. That's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. On the other hand, once you actually do it, once you actually engage in this, making these kinds of judgments, then it's not so mysterious anymore. And then when we talk about the original position, you can start to understand how we do it. Oh, we can really understand how we do it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it raises a follow-up. How does the original position provide a workable solution to issues like euthanasia for...
The original position doesn't solve every problem.
Yeah, because...
But think of it for this way. I mean, suppose you're saying, for example, I think it does for euthanasia. I mean, in the original position, if somebody says, oh, we're going to allow euthanasia, right? I mean, like, what, killing mentally defectives? I mean, you try to get that through the original position. But on the other hand, suppose you just talk about what's called assisted suicide at the end of life.
That was what I meant, is that I could imagine...
Notice that although I could have put that on there because every major religious tradition has a norm against suicide and assisted suicide. In the original position, it is a no-brainer to get an exception, right? We get exceptions for someone who's at the end of life, has a fatal illness, no prospect for recovery other than just painful death. Because in the original position, who's going to object to that exception? The person who's saying, I want to be able to die, is certainly not going to object to it. And see, in the original position, what's neat about the original position is you can't have any moral authorities. You don't know what your religion is. You have no idea. So you can't say in the original position, well, I'm going to appeal to my moral authority. You have to do it just on the basis of the considerations that can arise among you members of the original position where you have no knowledge who you are. So you have no knowledge who your moral authority is. And that's what's interesting about it. That's why it doesn't just give you the results that are predetermined. It actually gives you interesting results. And so, for example, you could have gone back to, 50 years ago, and you could have asked about assisted suicide when it was not even on the radar. And if you had done the original position thought experiment, you would have seen there's no good argument against it in the original position. I mean, am I missing something? Is there a good argument against it in the original position? The original position, you see, the only argument would be, that I can see is, you think, well, God doesn't want me to do it. But in order to know that, you would have to already know what religion you have and what your God commanded. In the original position, you don't know that. So you just have to ask, okay, well, what would I agree to as the rules? And notice, what's crucial about it, what makes it non-controversial is, it's only assisted suicide for people who want to commit suicide. Whereas euthanasia typically is killing people who don't want to be killed. You cannot get euthanasia to be agreed to in the original position, but assisted suicide is no problem because it's only the people who want to do it. And yet also, you can easily see in the original position, suppose somebody says, well, anybody who wants to kill themselves should be allowed to do it. In the original position, it would be very easy to say, well, but wait a minute, if this is just some kind of temporary depression or something like that, people in the original position are not going to agree that they should be allowed to kill themselves when they're in a temporary depression. But that's why assisted suicide is special, because it's one where it is the end of life. You're looking at 6 months of misery, and for that, the original position gives the result. People should be able to decide whatever they want to do. Is there anybody who thinks that in the original position there's some other argument that I'm missing that would end up some other way? Notice, yeah, but
I mean, what comes to mind is people in comas over long term, that there's some cases where people have recovered from.
yeah,
Like,
and so that's why for something like that, you might, I mean, again, what I would expect in the original position would be some kind of advance directive. In other words, you wouldn't be allowed to terminate life support unless there were an advance directive that said, in certain circumstances, please. That's the only thing I can do. In other words, not doing it against people's will. That's just not going to be agreed to. See, what's interesting is here you have an example, we can give lots of others, of something which even 50 years ago, before it was even on the radar, if people had asked this question, I think it would have been quite clear to them what would agree to. They wouldn't have accepted it. You see, that's what's really interesting. I'm not saying, oh, just because something would be agreed to in the original position, everyone will accept it. That's not true at all. Because when they come out from behind the veil of ignorance, then they will know who their moral authorities are, and they'll say, well, my moral authority tells me so. But even if they have moral authorities in the original position, they'll be able to do this kind of... my point only right now is that there is a way of thinking, which I'm saying has a certain kind of objectivity, that people can do, even if they have moral authority. Yes?
Have time for one more, Bill?
Oh, one more? Oh, wow, this is sort of an important one, isn't it?
Okay.
Is there somebody who's been having your hand up a long time and I haven't? Because I haven't been looking at this side of the room.
For two more?
Let's do two more, yeah. Okay.
So it seems like the product of the original position is that of equality, and that it has like a principle.
It has some kind of, it's actually giving content to a certain kind of equality, that's right.
I wanted to ask though if there was any social situations where inequality and disparity was beneficial. I'm thinking, particularly in terms of aesthetics, like if would the Harlem Renaissance have happened had economic oppression existed?
Okay, well, good. Well, let's hold that example because that's a bit of an easy one. In the original position, will children have equal rights with adults?
If I was a child, I would certainly have equal rights.
No, you wouldn't. The original position, now in the original position where you have to be able, you would say, even if I identify with the child, I recognize that having my parents take care of me is a good way to grow up and become an adult. And for example, again, those of us who have children, when my daughter Kate got the idea she was going to run out into traffic, I didn't feel as though I had to persuade her that she shouldn't do that. I stopped her. In the original position, that's a no-brainer. Okay, so inequality can be justified in the original position. But now you say, well, suppose somebody says, it's sort of like, there must be great suffering in order to be great art. So in the original position, now, will we force people to suffer in order for there to be great art? I don't know. That's a tough one for me. I don't think so. But you can make the argument if you want to try. But I suppose that there will be a certain kind of freedom so that if somebody wants to suffer in order to produce great art, it's not as though in the original position they're going to prevent people from doing that. But yeah, suppose somebody says, it's necessary that we oppress 1 million people in order that there be one great artistic genius. That is not going to fly in the original position. Does everybody see that? No matter how great that artistic genius is, it's not going to fly.
Well, I'm not necessarily asking for a defense of the original position, but I'm asking if you can get a product that is worth the social cost that would not.
Well, make the argument. All I'm saying is in the original position, you can make the argument. It's worth the social cost, right? So I can easily imagine there might be some situation like that You know, you could say, for example, I mean, someone could say, I mean, it's totally crazy when you look at how much inequality there is in the United States today. But I think a plausible argument can be made that some inequality, this is kind of Rawlsian argument, some inequality provides the incentives for a productive system that benefits everyone. That would be an argument for some inequality. So that would get justified in the original position. There's no way in the world you could justify having a system where 1% of the population has greater net worth than the bottom 90%. Try to get that one to go in the original position. Now, okay, I'll ask you, and then, by the way, if you didn't get a chance to ask a question, there's a reception afterwards. Please come and talk to me. Yes?
Isn't the social contract theory a cognitive framework from which it would be impossible to see moral blind spots?
They all have moral blind spots.
So we're progressing towards the social contract, like a perfect idea of that, but won't eventually.
Then we'll find out there's something with a blind spot on that one.
So they're always.
At least you know my view, right? So what's interesting, you see, is that people are asking these questions because they actually are smart and they recognize an implication of my view, but they're worried that maybe I shouldn't accept it. So they're going to say, okay, let's really test him and see, is he really going to accept it? And see, you recognize that, which is really neat, because most people would say, oh, what Talbott is saying is, we've got the original position, that's the final word, that's going to solve all moral problems. He recognized that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that at this stage in our understanding, that's probably our best understanding. But you recognize whatever stage we reach, I'm going to insist, there are going to be moral blind spots, so there's going to be room for improvement. What an amazing idea. What a breathtaking idea. Okay, thank you very much. We'll continue.